All right, let's talk Dallas Cowboys. I'm Nick, and this is our daily Cowboys show. A lot of news to get to today, a lot of spicy stuff. But as we always like to on this channel, get things started with a little stat of the day, a little palate cleanser for you guys. And there's a little bit of negativity, to put it mildly, when it comes to a lot of guys on this Cowboys defense. But there's one guy, and I'm going to pull up the graphic right here, that's jumping off the film, and that's rookie second rounder Donovan Ezraku. We've been covering him a lot over the past couple weeks. This guy's becoming a heck of a football player against the run, playmaking, hustle, athleticism. And while he hasn't recorded a sack yet, if you look at the metrics, he's getting very close. So this is the graphic here, courtesy of Patent Analytics. And what they came up with is they just mapped the average time to pressure and the pressure rate for defensive ends. On the x-axis, you can see the average time to pressure. So the far left there would be a higher time to pressure, which is not as good as a quicker time to pressure, which would be on the right. And then, of course, you have the pressure rate on the y-axis there. So ideally, in a perfect world, you get a lot of pressures, high pressure rate, and you get them quickly all the way on the right. So like any good graphic like we see these days, you want to be in the upper right-hand quadrant. And who is leading the charge in the upper right-hand quadrant, right? Not Micah Parsons. Not Aiden Hutchinson, not Myles Garrett, although they're all right there, not Will Anderson. It is none other than the Dallas Cowboys rookie second rounder, Donovan Ezraku. He's got a higher average time to pressure than Garrett, than Bosa, than Hutchinson, than Micah Parsons, than all those guys. And his pressure rate right there is just right behind guys like Hutchinson and Parsons and ahead of guys like Garrett, Will Anderson, and others. So Ezraku has, at least from an analytical perspective, been playing really good football. He's been showing up on the tape, right? He's been pretty productive in terms of making plays, although the sacks haven't been there. He's a really good player. He's been as good as advertised. And I think he is a guy to build around this defense for the future. And I think when a lot of people, when they looked at Donovan Ezraku being selected by the Cowboys, looked at him as potentially being one of the steals of the draft potentially, he's living up to that moniker. Now, look, he's not getting like 15 sacks, but rookies come out and they just don't get a lot of sacks the first few seasons, certainly the rookie season. Micah Parsons is such a weird exception. That's why he got so much praise so early in his career. Look at the New York Giants with their top 5 pick Abdul Carter, who's playing very well. He's not compiling a lot of sacks. Former Cowboy Demarcus Lawrence, who obviously had a very good long career with Dallas. He didn't get very many sacks his rookie year. So sacks, especially the first half of your rookie year, don't really seem to come in that aggressively. Even DeMarcus Ware, I think he finished with like 8. I think his rookie year or something like that. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section below. So as great as he was, an all-time great, Hall of Famer, one of the best edge rushers of all time, one of the best edge rushers of the 21st century, bar none. He didn't exactly line up the stat sheet with sacks his rookie year either. And I'm not saying Ezraku's going to be as good as Ware or any of those guys, but the reality is he's playing good football. And it looks like, as bad as the Cowboys defense has been, he's definitely a key piece to build around going forward. All right, let's get into some of the spicy news. So this was reported by Tommy Yarish. Jerry Jones on 105.3 The Fan, when asked if he feels the Cowboys defense can be competitive enough to make linebacker DeMarvion Overshown's return count. Jones said, "We will have something else by the time that we get there, and I hope that Overshown's return is sooner than 4 to 5 weeks." So that is very interesting, right? Talk about hoping Overshown's return is sooner. I think there's a lot of optimism that he could be in sooner. It seems to be the latest would be the 5-week mark, the absolute latest. So they're hoping it could be potentially only 3 or 4, which would be absolutely outstanding, of course. But I think what's interesting there is that sentence. We will have something else by the time that we get there. Now, I don't really know what that means, right? Does it mean the defense will just play better? Does it mean they'll have, different lineup? Or does it mean they're going to go out and acquire someone? Are they cooking up a deal behind the scenes? It's kind of interesting. A little coy there from Jerry Jones. And listen, he is the salesman. He is the spin doctor, depending on your negative framing. If you're negative with Jerry Jones, he's a spin doctor. If you're positive, he's just a really good salesman, right? So it's one of those things that he could just be hyping up some buzz, getting the guys on the radio to be, ooh, what's going on there? And getting guys like me to talk about it. But here's where it's interesting. And when this comment was first made, it brought me back to a report I saw a couple days ago. And I kind of dismissed the report offhand. But now that we've got 2 data points here, I think we can kind of corroborate them together. So this was courtesy of the Sleeper NFL X account. The 49ers, Colts, Eagles, and Cowboys are all in the market for Trey Hendrickson, the Bengals defensive end, should he be available at the deadline per Tony Pauline. Now, Tony Pauline is an NFL reporter. I don't know his success rate on this kind of stuff, and obviously the Cowboys being one of 4 teams, I mean, that's not an indication the Cowboys are actively, leading the charge or putting in a super serious interest in Hendrickson, or that the Bengals are willing to ship him. But it is interesting that now we now have two data points. Jerry Jones mentioning that something else may be there, and another data point saying the Cowboys may be interested to trade. I think it's starting to get interesting on this trade front here because, I've talked about Trey Hendrickson, and I know a lot of people have as well. But if you trade Micah Parsons and you're able to acquire acquire Hendrickson for, let's say, a second and a fifth or something like that, which would seem unlikely. Let's say you're able to do it. You talk about a huge win when you trade Parsons for two number ones and Kenny Clark, and you basically trade a second and a fifth or something like that for Hendrickson. So you basically trade, Parsons and a second and a fifth for two number ones, Kenny Clark and Hendrickson. That would be an absolute steal, undeniably so. Now, will that happen? I don't know. I'm a little skeptical. I think Cincinnati's probably going to ask for a lot, especially since the Bengals won Thursday night. They probably feel like, listen, we can hang around in the AFC North. Joe Burrow comes back. Maybe we can make a run at this thing. So I don't necessarily think the Bengals are going to ship Hendrickson, but it is interesting that Jerry Jones mentioned a trade, and it's, some reporting now from at least one source saying the Cowboys are at least looking at veteran defensive ends, which, to be fair, they should, right? If there's a quality guy that's available at the right price that you think could be a long-term part of this defense, you absolutely should look for him, because the Cowboys are trying to figure out who's going to be long-term pieces. And what we've seen so far through 6 games is that Dante Fowler is not, Sam Williams is probably not, for sure. So, and those are two guys that are getting a lot of reps. Ezraku is for sure. Houston, I think, could be a long-term pass rush specialist, right? So you look at just those two pieces are there, but now they need to figure out the rest of the guys. If you can go into the NFL draft and, next year, and let's say you traded a second and fifth for Hendrickson, I'm just making that up, and now you've got one defensive end in Ezraku, one defensive end in Hendrickson, then you can look at those 2 first-round picks and have a different mindset. And I think that's where the Cowboys have to be very, very active this time of the year. Now, you don't want to overreact and trade away a lot and get like a Roy Williams, right? Remember when he was Dallas traded for Roy Williams from Detroit, the other Roy Williams? That didn't work out at all. And I think you have to take a long-term approach here. But if you get the right player at the right price, I could see the Cowboys making a deal. Because I think Jerry Jones understands, and I think the Cowboys and Schottenheimer understand that their talent deficiency is so extreme that, drafting multiple rookies in the first round next year, while it's probably the path they're going to take, doesn't necessarily guarantee that those rookies will be able to step up and be key starters week 1. I mean, even the Atlanta Falcons, who drafted 2 defensive ends in the first round, James Pierce Jr. and Jalen Walker, who have had really nice seasons, neither of them are starting, or at least haven't started until recently. Certainly Jalen Walker is the only guy who's getting close to starting reps. So those are 2 first rounders that are, good players. But the Falcons had veteran defensive ends that still start and play a lot of football. So even if you go really heavy in the draft and get 2 guys who are basically starters, there's no guarantee that that's enough to turn your defense around, because they're just not going to play enough right off the rip. So do you bring in a veteran like Hendrickson or a guy like that to kind of, be a guy to kind of lead the charge there while you use some of your draft picks on other players on defense? I think there's a real argument to be made there. It'll be something to really, really interested to keep an eye on as the Cowboys work forward, as we work closer to the trade deadline. All right, this next report is courtesy of John Machota, and this is where things get very interesting and very disappointing at the same time. Cowboys coach Brian Schottenheimer said Trevon Diggs had an accident at his home last night. He has a concussion. He won't play Sunday. Okay, so obviously this is an accident, at least reportedly, right? We're gonna assume it's an accident. We wish Trevon Diggs the best. It doesn't appear to be anything super serious. He just won't play Sunday, right? That's the reporting as of right now. Things can change. However, when we look at the context of things, and as it is with any story, as it is with any event, you always have to take in the context of every event. Let's just back up and look at the Trevon Diggs, sort of saga over the past few months. Doesn't rehab with the Cowboys, misses his big bonus that he could have gotten by rehabbing with the Cowboys. A little disappointed by that, obviously, hundreds of thousands of dollars out the window. But he's able to play week 1, all good there. He's disappointed in the Parsons trade, really disappointed. He got benched before the Green Bay game, because he was very vocally disappointed. He had a very disaster game against the Giants and had just 1 or 2, I think 1 play for sure against the Bears where he fell down. I think a second play where it was partly his fault, although I'm not sure exactly in terms of the zone coverage. But he has 2 very, very rough games, gets benched before the Packers for kind of mouthing off in the locker room, reportedly. And then plays well against Green Bay. Is battling through some injuries. He's not playing his best football overall. And he's just kind of been not a great guy that turns into a teammate. It seems he's had sort of some vocal things with the Eberflus scheme and the strategy and things like that. He's been very vocal about some things that maybe he shouldn't be. I think there's some things he probably should be about, right? And there's just been a lot of drama with Trevon Diggs, and it's become very clear to me that he does not want to be part of the Dallas Cowboys' long-term vision. He just doesn't, right? And I'm not saying this concussion like he hurt himself or he's lying. I'm just saying when you look at an event like this, I honestly believe sometimes, you can kind of think and wish your way into certain situations. Right now Diggs does not want to play for Dallas, and so he just so happens to get a concussion and a head injury. It's just, hey, look at that. The universe answered, answered what you were asking for there. And again, I'm not saying he hurt himself intentionally or anything like that, but I think, you see things like this. It's weird all the time. It feels like, anyway, with players that want out of a team or want out of an organization, suddenly they get an injury that gets them exactly what they want, right? It's very bizarre how that works out sometimes. But Diggs, if you look at the entire context of everything, it looks like his Cowboys career is done, right? He's a guy that obviously best friends with Micah Parsons. He's dealing with injuries. This is a guy in 2020 had a really rough rookie season, but came on strong with turnovers at the second half of the year. 21 gave up a lot of yards, but was a superstar with interceptions. 22 was a really good player. 23 hurt. 24 banged up and okay performance. And 25, he hasn't been playing well, returning from the injury. He's been playing okay, but he hasn't been playing great. Since returning from the injury, no plays, no interceptions, did have one pick called back against the Packers. So this is a guy who's being paid Pro Bowl All-Pro money and is basically being paid he's basically playing like an average starter, right? While getting all that money, while also being, kind of a negative force reportedly in the locker room, right? Kind of a little malcontent. He's battling through some injury issues. So is he bought in? And I think that's the real question you have to ask yourself. Is Trevon Diggs bought in? Especially considering that Diggs, coming into the season, he was on basically a year where if he didn't play well, he was going to get cut for salary cap purposes. I think he's done. I'm not saying he won't play anymore the rest of the season, but honestly, at this point, for the last 2 seasons, in 23 when he got hurt, I was so disappointed. In 24, I kept waiting for times when he would be healthy, and when he missed the rest of the season at the end there, I was disappointed. But to be totally fair, I'm just done with Trevon Diggs at this point. Like, the promise of Diggs being this, all-pro, all-elite, future cornerstone corner with the interceptions, it's just over, right? Part of it is injuries. I think part of it is, frankly, his attitude, and part of it is just the structure and everything that's happened with the Dallas Cowboys. Listen, it happens sometimes, right? And push come to shove, I think it's time for Dallas to move on. I would not be against trading Trevon Diggs at this point. Now he's hurt, he's got the concussion, they obviously can't, and someone has to be willing to, give up something for Diggs, and based on his contract, I don't know who will necessarily. But I do look at the reality of the situation based on all the context and everything that's happened over the past few months. Trevon Diggs no longer wants to be a Dallas Cowboy. And at this point, I think he'll definitely be cut. I would put the odds of him getting cut in the offseason at like 99% if he lasts that long. And I think the odds of him getting traded are really, really high. And you can hear the ownership group. You can hear Stephen Jones and Jerry Jones, when they were asked about it, like, hey, we got no comment. Just wish him the best, right? There wasn't any, usually when there's an injury like this or an accident, there's like an outpouring of disappointment in terms of, boy, what bad luck, gosh, this is going to hurt us really bad. This is so disappointing. Our thoughts and prayers with Trevon. Instead, it's a lot of no comment, right? I think there's a lot of frustration in Dallas with Diggs, and I think he's on his way out. I actually wouldn't be surprised. I don't think it's the highest probability outcome. I wouldn't be surprised now that Kalen Carson is theoretically going to play. Elam gets elevated, of course, he's played. You look at Bridges, of course, a young corner that they added prior to the season. They may just sit there and say, listen, man, if no one wants to trade him by the deadline, I wouldn't be surprised if they're like, Trevon, you're gone. We're just going to cut you now. Just get ahead of the curve. And to be totally honest, I wouldn't hate that. And nothing against Diggs. I was a big fan of his, obviously, in 21. And I think we all were. I think we liked how he played in 22. But the reality is he never even came close to living up to his contract. And when you become a distraction, like say what you want about Brandon Carr in terms of not living up to his contract, which he didn't, he was never a distraction. Trevon Diggs in 2024, now in 2025, has been a total distraction while also failing to live up to his contract. That's a recipe for just not good things to happen for the long-term trajectory of any franchise. I think Diggs is on his way out. I don't think he makes it past March. All right, let's get into this next report here. Back to more positive stuff. I wanted to talk about literally Donovan Ezeraku and trading for edge rushers. That's all I wanted to talk about today. And then the Trevon Diggs stuff broke and makes things a little more interesting. But this is, again, per Patent Analytics, who's a great account to follow on X, by the way, if you're looking for some nice data. Rookie edge pressure leaders per P or FTN Fantasy. Number 1 is Abdul Carter with 20 at a 12% clip. Number 2 is Ezeraku with 16 at a 15.7% clip. You can see the rest of the list there. Jordan Birch, Nick Scoren, Josiah Stewart, Mike Green, Michael Williams. And I'm not going to Oluwafemi Oladejo. Hey, there you go. I think I actually pronounced that pretty good. I struggle with those names sometimes. It took me like 4 years to learn how to say Odafe Owe correctly, and even then I butcher it half the time. But anyway, you look at these guys, you can see Ezeraku's got the best pressure rate among the group by far. He's 3.7% ahead of Abdul Carter. He's got the second most pressures, double number 3 with Jordan Birch, only 4 behind Carter. And again, Carter was a top 10, top 5 pick. It speaks to how good Ezeraku's been. We talked about the graphic on our stat of the day. He's just a piece to build around for the future. You know, he is the guy. I talked about it earlier this week. They got one of their guys. Ezeraku is going to be a key part of this defense for a very long time. And he's going to fit in perfectly. And him, Deron Bland, Overshown, Leafau in some roles, right? They've got obviously Kenny Clark and Oso Digizua. They've got some pieces in place to build around going forward. The problem is a lot of the other players on the field are just so bereft of talent and production. I mean, everyone from Fowler, everyone from Sam Williams to Sanborn to Kenneth Murray to Donovan Wilson to whoever plays the opposite safety, whether it's Hooker, whether it's Bell, whether it's Wanye Thomas, to now whoever's going to play opposite of Deron Bland with Trevon Diggs out. And even with Trevon Diggs, they just were lacking so much talent and playmaking ability. It just was obviously the scheme, regardless of the scheme, this talent is just not there defensively. But guys like Ezeraku, right, they'll be pieces for a long time. Now, the question with a guy like Donovan Ezeraku is, can he turn this analytical performance and this film performance into production? But even if he can't, if the Cowboys can add a couple other pieces, you can get this sort of overwhelming effect of just having so many guys that are good football players, the production follows. So it's one of those things where maybe adding a Hendrickson or adding multiple first-round picks with an Ezeraku, with those defensive tackles, suddenly you look around and like, okay, well, none of these guys may be an all-pro in terms of production. We throw 5 guys out there that are just good football players, good things will happen. And I think the Cowboys, actually, as weird as it sounds, are in a good position for their defensive front. I mean, really in a good position for their defensive front going into next offseason. And I think that is, as bad as things have been and as bad as things probably will be the rest of the year defensively, the future when it comes to the front is in really good hands. All right, this next report is from Tommy Yarish. It's a little bit of correction from yesterday. Yarish posted, does Cowboys defensive coordinator Matt Eberflus think Dallas has an identity on defense? He says, I still think we're working. I do think that up front, I think we have an identity that's good. The guys are coming off the ball and doing that. It's important that we keep working, keep finding solutions of what works best for the guys that we have. Yeah, so yesterday, I forget what reporter I cited, and it doesn't really matter, but it's important when you guys, and these reporters actually pull quotes from these sources that they get the whole context. And yesterday I cited a report that unfortunately didn't, because it made it sound like Eberflus's answer was, we don't have an identity, we're still trying to figure that out. And that's not what he's really saying. He's saying up front, we got an identity, the guys are coming off the football, Clark, Oso Digizua, Clowney, Houston, Ezeraku, right? And like I mentioned a second ago, we've seen the numbers. Ezeraku's playing good ball. We've had stretches of Clark and Oso Digizua playing really good ball. Houston's made a lot of plays. Clowney and his limited snaps have done some good things as well. So if you look at Eberflus's full context here, what he's saying is that up front, we've got an identity, we've got some things, we got to keep working. Basically saying our linebackers stink and our coverages have stunk too. And to be totally honest, he's not wrong. Now, obviously, Eberflus plays a huge factor in the blame when it comes to that. But the reality is it's a completely different context of the quote than what was cited yesterday in the report. And that's one of my beefs sometimes with journalism. And I'm not going to pick on and just blame the guy who I quoted, because it's on me. I got to double check it too. But it's like, listen, if you're going to cite a guy in a press conference, cite the whole paragraph, what he said. Don't just pull words out here and there and try and create a narrative about it just because it fits you or because that's what you thought the narrative should be. That's the one thing that will frustrate me with journalists, because we can look at entirely what he said here, and it's completely different than what I said yesterday when the report said Matt Eberflus says they're still looking for their identity. And it's like, well, that's not what he said. He said, I think, if you look at what he says, it's like, I think up front we're good and we're still working to find solutions. So he didn't sit there and say we have no identity. Right? He's sitting there and said, listen, we're trying to solve some of these problems and we got some things fixed. And it sort of didn't answer the question. So I can see why the reporter yesterday was like, well, I'm going to, kind of read between the lines and try and come up with an answer to the question based on my reporting. But if the subject here doesn't answer your question, you don't pull words in and around just to make up, an answer to the question that you didn't answer. And I think that's just really bad journalism. And listen, I'm not a fan of that. And I think that's very frustrating for people like me who try and rely on these boots on the ground beat reporters to get it right. Yerish here, credit to him for pulling the whole quote, not out of context, just puts a bunch of sentences together, pulls his whole answer on the screen. So I really appreciate that. Now, in terms of what Eberflus is saying, listen, I think he's got the right mentality, but he bears so much of the blame for this, right? Murray and Sanborn are, linebackers. He's supposed to be a linebacker guru, and they've played very poorly, right? The secondary coverage issues, that's partly on him. You can make an argument most of it's on him. I would. The front four is playing better, but they're far from great. Why is Sam Williams, why is Dante Fowler playing as much as they are, right? Let's get, Ezra Raku getting more snaps, let him play starter snaps. Let's let basically a three-man rotation here of Nealand and Clowney and then Morgan Houston in those pass rushing situations. Let that be the main force. And then basically have Williams and Fowler, make Fowler a pass rush specialist, right? Make him play 25 snaps a game in a limited role. Make Sam Williams play 15, 20 snaps a game in a limited role, right? I think that makes more sense from a personnel perspective. Now, again, I'm not in the locker room. I'm not in the film room. I can't, look at what these players are doing versus what the coaches are asking them to do and their attitude and their work ethic and how they're doing in practice and all of those factors that matter into how much people play on Sundays. But I do think Eberflus, while he's correct here, it doesn't absolve him as a huge chunk of the blame with the performance. And look, if you're the DC, you're the guy, big buck kind of stops with you to a certain extent. But I do think, just circling back to my first point, that when we're reporting on these guys, and every time a coach or a Jerry Jones or a player says something and it's pulled out of context and you just get one sentence and then just gets plastered everywhere, I think it's very frustrating because that's not what he said at all. I mean, he didn't answer the question. He kind of avoided it while complimenting the front four. But if you listen to all the reporting yesterday, he said they don't have an identity 6 weeks in the season. Oh my God, they don't have an identity. And that's not what he said. We need our beat reporters, who are generally fantastic. As a crew, they're usually outstanding, to do a little bit better. Credit to Tommy Yerish right here. All right, this next report, once again from Tommy Yerish. Again, Tommy, you do good stuff. I'm going to reward you by citing you out more. He says, Jerry Jones on 105 through the fan, when asked how good he thinks the Cowboys defense can be this season, we've had 3 defensive coordinators over the last 3 years. That's my fault. That really is. Wow, that's interesting to hear from Jerry Jones. Jones goes on to say, you knew you were going to have somebody different than the last 2 years when we hired Flus. On the other hand, you look at any of these defenses, they get better and better as the season goes along. That's just part of it. Okay, there's a couple things to unpack here. So first and foremost, how about Jerry Jones recognizing that 3 DCs in 3 years is a problem? And listen, that's 100% correct. So whether you love Jerry Jones, whether you hate Jerry Jones, the fact is he's right here. And as the GM, he named himself the general manager. He bears part of that responsibility. Obviously, what happened with Quinn taking a head coaching job, not really your fault, but you give Mike McCarthy 1 year, it doesn't work out, so you go a complete different direction. So as a GM owner, you're setting all this in motion and saying the buck stops with him. I think a lot of players and coaches appreciate that because it is very true here that 3 DCs in 3 years doesn't lend itself to any sort of success, right? You're not going to be good. Right, not even close to be good, right? We saw issues with Zimmer's defense last year. I mean, they played better the second half of the year, but my God, were they awful the first, half of the season. I mean, you can blame injuries all you want, but they put together some awful performances when healthy, like against the Saints and Baltimore Ravens, right? It's just one of those things where you start a new DC, it takes a long time to figure out how to play it, and obviously we're seeing that with the Cowboys and Eberflus right now. Now, I do think he says something there at the end, if you listen to that final sentence. On the other hand, you look at any of these defenses, they get better and better as the season goes along. That's just part of it. That's obviously a challenge to Eberflus, and I think Schottenheimer is kind of, by forcing some changes, has kind of alluded to this as well. He says, listen, it's been terrible, but there better be some improvement, or we may be 4 DCs in 4 years, right? And I think that's actually fair, right? There better be some improvement because this is a brand new scheme, like Jerry Jones mentioned, right? Zimmer was an aggressive hyper blitzer. Dan Quinn, not as much into blitzing, but still played a lot of man. Zimmer played a lot of blitzing mixed with a lot of man. And now you've got a guy here in Flus who is the exact opposite of both those guys, not nearly as aggressive with how he uses blitzes and rushing, and certainly not nearly as aggressive with the man coverage, at least so far. So at a certain point, if you're Jerry Jones, if you're Schottenheimer, if you're the Cowboys leadership, you're saying, listen, you're completely different. We get it. The talent deficiencies are there. We get it. No one's expecting you to be, elite. We're just looking for some sort of baseline competency. It can just be mediocre, right? Show some improvement. And I think that obviously is the key for the Dallas defensively the rest of the way, right? And listen, Ezra Ronku's a key piece. He's getting better and better. Good to see that. I think Kenny Clark and Oso Digizua, while, having a rough day against Carolina in a lot of ways, I think they're fine. I think Overshown getting back could certainly help things. Honestly, Diggs, losing Diggs, he's a good player, obviously, but he's a guy that's at his best when he's playing a whole lot of man. With him out of the fold, does it help Dallas? I don't think so. But there could be a little distraction potentially issue there that maybe put aside for a week or two, or if they decide to move on from him. And look, Deron Bland is getting more time, getting back into the fold. Remember, he missed a couple games there, so hopefully he's getting a little more comfortable. We'll have to see how this whole thing shakes out. Reddy Stewart continues to be acceptable at nickel. So there's a lot of things where maybe there are room for improvement. I think it's very possible. And in some ways, you can make an argument that a lot of these players like Kenneth Murray, it's like, listen, you're already playing terrible. Just play a little bit better, and you've improved, right? So there's certainly that element as well. But I do think Jerry Jones, all points here that he made are correct. It is his fault to a certain extent, and to a heavy extent. 3 DCs in 3 years is not conducive to success. And of course, when you look at the need for improvement just to evaluate Eberflus, that is certainly a key factor. So a lot of people hate on Jerry Jones, in some cases deservedly so. But based on this statement and this process that he's taken here, he's doing the right thing. All right, this next report here I kind of want to highlight because I think there's a misunderstanding going around in the space right now. So this began with Ed Werder posting cornerbacks Trevon Diggs and Deron Bland both signed to $90 million contract extensions, have led the NFL in interceptions in their careers this season. They have no interceptions and no passes defensed. They have not touched the football in 6 games. Diggs' interception versus Green Bay negated. That's all, of course, factually true, but of course, you can play zone coverage. You're going to get a lot less deflections and a lot less interceptions unless you get like tip balls or something like that, or inaccurate throws. And again, that's where the lack of pressure comes in. And I think that's not Diggs or Bland's fault. That's just a matter of personnel in terms of their front four rushing the passer with some of their guys like Fowler and Williams. Obviously, they don't blitz very much, so part of it is just the reality of the defense the Cowboys have with their guys on the field and their X's and O's. But I want to focus on what John Owning said here. And I think Owning, he's a guy that works for, I think, PFF, and he does a lot of stuff with the Cowboys. And he says, this is what happens when you bring in a DC who stubbornly forces players to fit into his scheme rather than retrofitting his scheme to fit the players. Rather than search for the right DC whose scheme fit the team's personnel, the front office decided that the head coach experience and familiarity with the org were more important. Malpractice. Okay, so I don't know anything about John Owning. I've never met him. I'm assuming he's a pretty successful guy. I hope he is, and maybe most of his posts or tweets are grounded in some sort of logic here, but this one isn't. Right? You don't hire managers, you don't hire middle managers, leaders, executives at any level for the guys you have and where you are today. Right? If that was the case, let me give you an example. A lot of you know this, right? So when Steve Jobs returned to Apple in the late 1990s, Apple was a mess. They were strictly hardware at the time. There was no iTunes. There was no Mac OS the way we think of it today. There wasn't this suite of crazy products, tablet computing, phones, iPod, none of that, right? They were basically hardware computer, and they were getting just destroyed by Hewlett Packard and all those guys. In fact, I think it was the HP. It was either Michael Dell or some HP CEO who said, "Listen, the best thing for Apple to do: shut the doors and return all the money to shareholders." I mean, they were struggling. Steve Jobs came in, and one of the first things he did, obviously, he had to cut costs. But when he started hiring guys, he didn't hire really good managers of how to build computers, like PC desktop computers, because that's all Apple was basically doing at that point. He didn't hire all those kind of guys. He said, "Listen, we're making computers, desktop computers. We need to bring in executives that know how to lead that." He said, "No, I'm going to hire people for where we're trying to go." He brought in industrial designers, for the products, for the look of the iPod and the iPhone and the iMac and things like that were to come. He brought in software guys, right, that he had worked with in the past to create operating systems so that way they can integrate with a smoother user experience on the hardware with their products, right? You hire guys not for where you are, but for where you're trying to go. Where is your vision? What is your plan? You hire guys, leaders specifically, that'll let you execute your vision and your long-term plan. I'll give you another great example. Clayton Adams is the worst hire for the Cowboys to bring in from a personnel perspective. Clayton Adams loves pulling offensive linemen. He loves running a lot of different play action schemes, a very complex, at times, power running scheme where they're pulling guys. They're doing all kinds of, pin pulls or getting on the edge inside. They do a multiple different rushing offense, downhill aggressive, right? Completely different than what they had under Mike McCarthy, which was a lot of basic zone, a lot of simple stuff, nothing crazy at all. Very little play action, very little motion. If you look at the personnel, Clayton Adams was the worst hire the Cowboys should have made. If you listen to John Oenig's argument, Clayton Adams was a stupid hire. They should have hired a Mike McCarthy acolyte, right? They should have hired Mike McCarthy to be their offensive coordinator, right? And, just promoted Schottenheimer. That's hilariously stupid, obviously. You don't hire your personnel in terms of your managers, your coordinators in this case, for where you are today with the players you have today. You hire with where you're trying to go as a team. Doesn't mean that Eberflus is a great hire. Doesn't mean he's a bad hire based on that factor. But you have to hire people where you want to go. What is your vision? My criticism of Eberflus has been he's not done a great job at the tactical level executing the long-term vision of the Dallas Cowboys defense. I think that's fair. You can also blame the talent. That's fair as well. But for people like Owning right here to say that, oh, this is a stupid decision by the organization, they should have hired a DC that's best for their talent. Folks, you're explaining why, you would be a guy that when Steve Jobs was making those hires in the 90s, that would be criticizing him, right? And I'm bringing up Steve Jobs. You don't bring up any successful executive, any successful pastor, charity leader, political leader, all those things. You don't hire guys. You don't bring in guys for where you are today. You bring in managers and executives that will lead and execute your vision for the future. That's obvious. That's day one stuff, right? You read any biography, you read any business book when it comes to hiring. They say, listen, when you're trying to get the bus headed in the right direction, it's important to get the right leaders on the bus to get you in that right direction. You don't hire for the people you have in terms of the products you have, the sales you have. You hire for the people that'll take you from where you need to go, where you want to go. If you're the big boss, if you're the CEO, if you're Schottenheimer, the head coach in this situation, if you're Jerry Jones, the GM, you hire people for where you want to go, not where you are today. That's obvious. That's day one stuff. And I don't mean to pick on Owning here. I'm sure he's a very smart guy. I'm sure he does a lot of great things. I haven't seen a lot of his stuff, but I'm sure he does a lot of good things. But I think when we see things like this, guys, it's important to understand that you have to take a different approach. You have to take a step back. You can't just sit there and say, as a fan, oh, play bad job by management to hire this person. It's not how it works. Clayton Adams, based on this logic right here, was the stupidest hire the Cowboys have made. He's fantastic. Right? Dan Quinn, by this logic, would have been a stupid hire. He was obviously fantastic in terms of turning around the defense, right? The reality is you hire for your long-term vision. That's the fact. That's what good organizations do. That's what any organization does. We're being totally honest. And when you see people like this say, well, they should have hired someone to fit the personnel they have, that's not how you do it. That's bad. That would have been the stupidest hire to do. Because then what you would have done, you would have maximized for this year. They would have been 20th in defense this year. And they never would have gotten better, never would get better. And they'd be stuck with their personnel, and then eventually it would collapse. And you wonder what would happen, right? We see that all the time in the NFL. We see teams that, are really feisty for a year or two. You're like, oh, they're so close. Because they're maximizing their personnel just to win for today, even though they don't have the talent to even come close to competing. They get to 7 or 8 wins or whatever, and then it falls apart the next season. They go 1-16, and then they have to completely start over and start the process all over again. You have to execute a long-term plan. Doesn't mean Eberflus's long-term plan or Shotty's long-term plan or Jerry Jones's long-term plan. Doesn't mean it's a good plan. Doesn't mean it will work. No, of course not. We don't know. It'll take a long time. But you hire based on that plan and vision, not based on what will help you this second in time, right? That's just a fact. That's what good organizations do. That's what any organization does. I think it's important we understand that. All right, let's get into the comments here. Let's get started with some member comments. This first one is from Dallas Birch 665, relatively new member. Good to see you once again commenting. He says, sorry if I was a little cynical in my last comment. Haha, I really appreciate the way you cover the Cowboys without being over emotional and giving us cool stats while being realistic at the same time. If all of us Cowboy fans could be like you, maybe the world wouldn't hate us so much. People would hate Dallas anyway, right? It's success hating, right? Obviously success, not championships, but in terms of wealth, power, prestige, attention, people are going to hate you no matter what. It's envy, right? Because it's not hate because they look at Dallas as something to hate, because it's not like the people hate the Chiefs or hate the Patriots because they were so good in winning. Obviously, Dallas isn't particularly good. It's envy, right? It's envy of the glitz and the glamour and the wealth and the prestige and the attention. So at this point, it's just envy. It wouldn't matter what anything else happened. People would be envious of the power of the Dallas Cowboys and the brand, and they would hate them because of that. Now, if Dallas actually started winning championships again, you'd see hate through the roof. You wouldn't believe. It would be I don't think people understand if Dallas actually becomes a legit championship team at some point in the future, God willing. The hate's going to just go up at an exponential level. One suggestion I've made in the past, if you would include your face in your thumbnails, it would help to recognize your videos much easier. In the past, I have scrolled past it on accident. I have since been sure to pay attention to the name. Long-term future question, do you ever see Dak playing for a different team in hopes of getting a ring? Well, to answer your first question, so, I've thought about this. I've experimented with it a little bit. So my sort of theme when it comes to the show is to make it less about me and as much about the players, the coaches, and I try to make it much about as you guys too, right? That's why I have this, this whole block here to go through comments, and I love the feedback and things like that. So I try to like put myself in the rearview mirror a little bit with the show and just make it about the news, make it about the data, make it about the reporting, the players, the coaches, right? All of those things that actually make up what we actually enjoy about football and the Dallas Cowboys, and the fans, the commenters, you guys, right? So I'm trying to put you guys to the forefront. I understand, hey, it could maybe help you out with, maybe making sure it's one of my videos. I get that, and that's fair. But I think just as a theme that I like for the channel, and as a theme as I like for the show, is I want to make it not about me. Like that's sort of like my bottom priority, is making it about me. Maybe that's a bad idea. I don't know. I'm open to feedback about that, but I want it to be about the commenters, you guys, the players, the coaches, the games. Like to me, that's what I want it to be about. So I try and put myself in the rearview mirror as much as possible. That's why I don't have like a cool like as you guys can see, we've got like the logo right in the bottom corner right here of the brand of the company, but I don't have like my name like stylized or anything like that. Even the Twitter handle, it's not my name, it's SMI Cowboy Show. That's just how I operate. Maybe that's a wrong idea, and I appreciate feedback on that, but that's just my thoughts. To answer your second question, do you ever see Dak playing for a different team in hopes of getting a ring? I mean, maybe, never say never, but listen, he's locked up for a long time, and he's playing good football. He likes Schottenheimer. We'd be talking about 3-4 years from now. It's hard to tell what the future holds. Listen, in 2014, Romo was obviously towards the end of his career, but he was still relatively healthy, playing great football, and then 12 months later, he was basically done. So I think it's one of those things, you never know how fast things can go. And so right now, thinking about what Prescott could do post this current contract with Dallas, it's just really, really hard to predict. Ryan's reactions, comments, are we not worried about Demo coming back so soon after he tore that same knee previously? I don't know. I just feel like it's risky. Well, I mean, again, that's why you rely on the doctors and you rely on the player to make sure they're ready. And look, he's the guy that got hurt, December-ish last year? It was after Thanksgiving, so I want to say December timeframe. So it's one of those things where it's been 10 months, 10 plus months, and an ACL, severe injury like that, is sort of considered at least 9 months. So it's not like he's coming back at a record-breaking pace. He's coming back sort of on schedule. And he's done great rehab, and he's a great athlete. So it's not like there's anything crazy there. Obviously, they're being precautionary as much as they can. But listen, overshown, and most importantly, he's a football player. You got to get these guys on the field, because football players play football just like anyone who does anything has to do that thing, because eventually you lose that thing. And I think, you look at the greats of all time of any sport. You look at Tiger Woods and Michael Jordan. When they were even competing, when they were banged up, Jordan famously played, I think it was his second year in the NBA with an injury that could have been career-threatening. And when asked about it later, he said, listen, I'm a basketball player. I play basketball. Right? That's just what I do. Not playing basketball would have hurt me becoming a better basketball player. And there's a little bit of that there with DeMarvin Overshown, and any NFL player, any athlete in general, right? You're an athlete. You play the sport. You got to play the sport. Obviously, you want to be careful and cautious with injuries, but if you just sit there and say, let's just be safe and just rest the rest of the season, take the year off, that's just not how these guys are wired. Buddha Namaste, I think that's right. 597 says, why Cowboys draft someone that's injured? God bless Revel, but sheesh. Well, he's a steal, right? He was a first-round talent, first, maybe early second-round talent that they got in the third round because of the injury, right? So that's just value. And they've done this before. Chris Canty in 2005 comes to mind. Jalen Smith obviously was drafted in the second round. Canty worked out. Jalen Smith, not so much. But the reality is you're trying to get value. And remember, think of it like this. When you're drafting guys, you're trying to think of them the percentage chance they can become a good player on a cheap deal, right? Because all rookies are cheap. So if you look at, say, a first-round pick, which generally has a 50-50 chance of being good, second-round pick, 1 and 3, third-round pick, 1 and 4, 25% chance. So, and you get 4 years of cheap, just to make it easy. I know first-rounders can have the fifth-year option. So if you look at it just from a probability perspective, if you have a first-round pick, 50% chance of him being a good player, 4 years, so that's 2 good player years, right? Now, if you look at a third-round pick, generally, you have a 25% chance of being a good player, 4 years, right? That's one 4 times 1/4. That's one good player a year. I know that's some math for you guys here. Now, if you look at Revel, right, and you say, okay, he's actually a first-round talent, but he wastes his first year, so it's really only 3 years. But he's still half a good player, right? 50% chance for 3 years. That's 1.5 player years. So that 1.5 is greater than what normally a third-round pick would be worth, just one. Now, that's obviously the logic behind it. Doesn't know if it'll work out that way. Time will tell. But that's what the Cowboys were thinking there. All right, this next comment is from Uncle Bubba Knows Everything 9143. Parsons should be a roaming linebacker. Imagine you're a GM and you draft Ray Lewis and play him at defensive end. Sure, he would be good, but not a Hall of Fame caliber player. Parsons' career has been wasted due to misuse. With that in mind, I'm glad they unloaded him before he ate a third of the salary cap. Love the channel. It is an interesting thought because they did play him some at linebacker, obviously, in 2021, and he hasn't played. There's been rumors, and he hasn't played, very much of it, since. There's been obviously some speculation they could move him around. It is very interesting because he was an off-ball guy in college, and the wear and tear at defensive end is completely different. And obviously, hindsight will tell us a lot. But will there be 4 or 5 years of Parsons being a really good stand-up off-ball linebacker, lost because of what he does at defensive end? I hope not. I wish him good health and happiness, of course, but it is certainly a question to be asked. And it does speak, by the way, to the short-term versus long-term mindset. Long-term, right? Does Micah Parsons play linebacker? A better answer for any defense, right? 15 years of being Warner with San Francisco, is that better than 10 years of being, an undersized, Garrett for example, Myles Garrett, a lesser Myles Garrett? It's a debate. It's a really serious question. Terrence Liebert, 8655, comments, this O-line is looking thus far like the great of Dallas from 1992 to 1995. High praise. And the other great wall from 14-16, they're keeping Dak clean like a Baptist preacher on Sunday. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those sort of underrated aspects of this group, right? And not all the analytics look great up front from the offensive line, depending on what site you use. But, Guyton's been not great, but he's been certainly fine. He's getting better. He's got some feistiness to him. Obviously, Tyler Smith's been battling through some injury, but he's Tyler Smith. They missed a lot of Cooper Beebe. Hoffman's had his flaws, but he's hung in there. Bass did fine. And then, of course, getting Booker back. And Terrence Steele, he's had his issues, but Nathan Thomas has stepped in. It's one of these weird things where no one on this offensive line has played, at an elite level every single game, and they've missed games. But the reality is they played pretty well together. And I think that's credit to them, the depth and the coaching. And it speaks to what Schottenheimer and this offensive staff have done, right? They found a way to patch together with these are devastating injuries, guys. This is an offense that should have done nothing over the past 3 weeks. All pro receiver, Weapon X, 5 different starting combination offensive linemen, second string running back out for the season, first year offense, right? This is 99 times out of 100, this is a disaster where you average 6 points a game. But they found a way, and it's a credit to coaching and obviously to Prescott and obviously the players for executing as well. Emmett is the GOAT comments, maybe Overshown does save the defense. We only need 1 or 2 stops a game, and we have 3 more wins already. That's all we need per game. Another stop or 2 on third down. This is an interesting point because if you look at the playmaking ability of a healthy DeMarvion Overshown, right, look at the game against Carolina. One of the few stops Dallas got was because of a sack Leofow guy. You throw an Overshown in there and let's say he gets another sack or a tackle for loss or makes a play on third down, like you said, and there's 1 stop, right? And suddenly that's 3 or 7 fewer points, right? 3, 4, 7 fewer points depending on when that stop occurs. And that's the difference in the game. Same thing with the Packers game, for example. So in the Eagles game too. So you bring up an interesting point. A healthy Overshown, if it's worth 1 stop a game, could be enough to get Dallas a lot better. And then that's, I think, why there's a lot of optimism when it comes to Overshown and maybe this defense playing better as the season progresses. Because if the offense can just kind of stay where they are, right? They don't have to get better. If they just kind of stay where they are a little bit and the defense can get just a few points better, then they should be a much better performing team overall. So I think that's one of the reasons for the optimism. William Van Dyke, 2849 comments, I'm not a headhunter when it comes to Eberflus, but he did come in when Micah was integral to the defense, and come to find out, guess what? I liken it to a V8 engine with a dead cylinder. It puts the other cylinders out of sync. No matter what you do, that engine won't run smooth. It takes a major rebuild to strengthen things up, assuming you have a good mechanic. Hope the best for the Cowboys. I love that analogy, right? Because it does bring the question, is Eberflus a good mechanic or is he the right mechanic? Does he know this engine? Right? Does he know what the performance of the engine needs to be? Is he the right mechanic to solve it? That's a very real question. But the engine does need to be rebuilt, right? It's a 2-part problem. People who think Eberflus is exclusively the problem are incorrect. People who think that Eberflus is 100% doing great are also incorrect. It's a 2-part problem that, at least right now, we'll have to see, of course, as the season progresses. But I love that analogy. That's a perfect description. All right, this next comment is from the guy, Tyler. We are solid on offense. If we can retain who we have right now and trade or draft to bolster our defense, we will be solid. Yeah, I mean that was the plan, right? They put a lot of time and effort and capital with both trading guys like Pickens and draft picks with guys like Booker on the offense, much less with the defense. In fact, they traded away short-term things like Michael Parsons for the defense. So yeah, I mean that's how the team is structured for sure. Travis Graham 7636 comments, I'm in agreement that Overshawn won't completely change the defense, but I do think his energy is infectious and it can elevate our defense to play at a level that's better than what we've seen. I'm praying he can get back to how he was last year. Yeah, I think there is that element there. There could be a morale boost. We talk about making, one or two more big plays a game is worth 3, 4, 7 points for this defense, which could be enough to give the Cowboys a few more wins down the stretch. So there is certainly that mentality there. And a lot of people have come out and said the Cowboys are setting up Overshawn to fail. Listen, the only way Overshawn could fail is if he's like not the same, if he like lost his personality, because the Cowboys have been so bad at linebacker, just being, like you said, infectious and energetic and just playing with reckless abandon and just having energy and not, and as bad as they've been at linebacker is just an improvement by itself. So I would disagree that the Cowboys are setting Overshawn up to fail. I think right now he's just from his energy and infectiousness alone, he improves his defense. When you throw in his playmaking, even if he doesn't even have to play at an all-pro level, just make 1 or 2 plays a game, just because how bad they've been, they're just going to look infinitely better. The real Daryl 282 comments, it's no brainer to keep Pickens. The transition from college to the pros is not easy. There are so many things you can get away with in college that will get you embarrassed in the pros. I agree they should keep Pickens. I think a tag and extend is probably most likely, but the salary cap is a constraint. I think they'll work around that. I'm not too concerned about it. Obviously, Diggs leaving would basically open up that, make it a very easy move to make. So I think you have Diggs gone, basically contractually speaking, replace Diggs with Pickens. I think that's what the Cowboys, it's not going to be dollar for dollar like that, but I think that's kind of what the Cowboys are targeting. That's my gut feeling right now. Jared Goldberg, 4904 comments, I praise Schottenheimer for getting involved like a head coach should, talking about him making changes on the defense, forcing changes. But if he has to take over the defense, that speaks volumes about the DC. Just get rid of him and then put an intern if Shoddy is doing it all himself anyways. I'd be embarrassed if my boss had to come in and do my job for me. If that happened, I'd understand if he let me go. Yeah, I mentioned this, I think, Monday morning or Tuesday morning, I forget. I think it was Tuesday, where, yeah, this is sort of setting the conditions, Schottenheimer, for getting rid of Eberflus because of how active Shoddy has to be. Like you said, if you're an employee and the boss had to come in and help you and sit next to you and be in your meetings, that's an indictment on you, and everyone would see that as like, oh my goodness, like I talked about how in corporate America, that's one of the precursors to getting fired. Now, Shoddy, I think, to his credit, is being active as he should, so that's A+ work from Schottenheimer. But the reality is, I agree with you, like a lot of people that sit there and say, well, it's Eberflus is still fine, the coaches and organization believe in him. Yeah, they're going to say that publicly. Don't look like people will stand by players and coaches all the way until the moment they're fired. Jerry Jones called Mike McCarthy a great coach when they were like 3-7 last year, and towards the end of the year, where he's like, he's a great coach. Even at the end of the year after they were missing the playoffs and they were going to, losing season. I think after they got killed by Philadelphia in Week 17, he's like, Mike McCarthy's a great coach, right? Does he bring McCarthy back? No, right? Because when you're the manager, when you're the owner, you're always going to say publicly nice things, or 99.9% of the time you're going to say nice things. That's why it's a big deal, the fact that Cowboys didn't say nice things about Trevon Diggs, by the way. I think that's an indicator but with this news when it comes to Diggs. But I think the reality is right now the Cowboys are going to say one thing publicly, but what they do actually with their actions, that's going to speak a lot louder. And right now, Shoddy being hyperactive in terms of working with Eberflus to try and enforce some changes is as big as an indicator as you can look for that they're not happy with his performance as a defensive coordinator and that he is on thin ice. All right, like I said, a lot of spicy news to get to. Try to get through it all. There's still even more stuff, guys. I had to leave a lot of stuff on the cutting room floor because there's so much stuff going on as the Cowboys obviously prepare for their Sunday matchup. Diggs is out. Rest of the guys are in. You look at Booker, Lamb, Turpin, return into the fold there. Sanborn is reportedly out of concussion protocol. Interesting to see what the Cowboys do there. Probably Shamar James at passing situations, Sanborn on rushing situations. That's my gut feeling. We'll see how it all shakes out. Ezraco needs more reps. He's a great player. We'll have to see what the Cowboys do there. Obviously, we'll come back tomorrow morning with even more news as the Cowboys get into game day. But until then, I'm Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection.